The iron shackles had worn raw grooves into Elena Rodriguez's wrists, but the physical pain meant nothing compared to the terror clawing at her chest. Dust swirled around the wooden platform where she stood, her dark hair matted with sweat, and grime, her olive skin bearing the bruises of 3 weeks in captivity. The crowd below her was a sea of leering faces, their voices rising in a grotesque auction that would determine her fate. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Look at them eyes, gentlemen, green as emeralds. And that skin-perfect blend of Spanish fire and Indian endurance. Marcus Webb's voice boomed across the trading post courtyard, his meaty hand gripping Elena's chin to turn her face toward the bidders. This one's worth every penny, strong enough for fieldwork, pretty enough for other duties. Elena's stomach churned as crude laughter erupted from the crowd. Somewhere in this hellish marketplace, her 15-year-old sister Rosa was, probably facing the same degradation, the same reduction of their humanity to mere commodity. The thought made Elena's knees threaten to buckle, but she forced herself to stand tall. Rosa needed her to be strong. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on Copper Ridge's main square, turning the air thick and suffocating. Elena squinted against the glare, searching desperately for any sign of her sister among the chaos of the trading post. All she could see were hungry eyes and grasping hands, men who looked at her like she was livestock to be purchased and broken. $50, shouted a voice from the back. 60, came another, closer to the platform. Webb grinned, revealing teeth stained brown with tobacco. Come now, boys, don't insult the lady. This premium bloodline starts at 100 minimum. The nightmare had begun 3 weeks earlier, when Elena thought the worst thing that could happen was losing their small homestead outside Santa Fe. She had been wrong, so terribly wrong. Elena Rodriguez had always known her mixed heritage made her different. Her mother, Isabella Torres, had been full-blooded Navajo. Her father, Thomas Rodriguez, a Spanish settler who had disappeared when Elena was barely 10 years old. Growing up, Elena had straddled 2 worlds, never quite belonging to either. Her copper-colored skin was too dark for the Spanish community, her green eyes too light for her mother's people. When consumption took Isabella 2 years ago, Elena and Rosa had been left with nothing but their mother's small adobe house and a few goats. Elena had worked tirelessly to keep them afloat, taking and washing, selling vegetables from their meager garden, doing whatever honest work she could find. But honest work was scarce for a mixed-blood woman in territorial New Mexico, and debts had a way of growing like tumbleweeds in drought. The foreclosure notice had arrived on a Tuesday morning that started like any other. Elena had been hanging laundry behind their house when she spotted the official-looking writer approaching. The man had handed her a folded paper with all the ceremony of a death sentence. 60 days to settle their debts or lose everything. Elena had stared at the impossibly large number written in stark black ink. $200 might as well have been $2,000. She could work for 5 years and never see that kind of money, not in a territory where her kind of work paid pennies on the dollar. That evening, as she sat with Rosa around their small fire, trying to figure out what to do next, Marcus Webb had appeared at their door like a serpent sensing wounded prey. "Evening, ladies," he had said, tipping his hat with mock politeness. Webb was a large man, soft around the middle but with cruel eyes that missed nothing. His clothes were expensive but somehow always looked dirty, as if the moral filth of his business seeped through the fabric. "Heard you might be having some financial difficulties." Elena had immediately felt something cold settle in her stomach. Webb had a reputation throughout the territory officially. He was a labor contractor who helped connect workers with employers. Unofficially, everyone knew he dealt in human cargo, exploiting the desperate and forgotten. "We're managing just fine," Elena had lied, keeping her voice steady. Webb had smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. "Come now, Miss Rodriguez. No need for pride between neighbors. I'm here to help." He had pulled out a leather pouch, the coins inside clinking softly. "I have work for you, good work. Wealthy family in California needs experienced housekeepers. The pay is excellent. And they're specifically requesting diverse staff." Elena had felt Rosa move closer behind her, seeking comfort and protection. At 15, Rosa was beautiful in the way that made Elena worry constantly about her safety. She had inherited their mother's delicate features and their father's lighter coloring, making her appear almost ethereal in certain light. "What kind of work exactly?" Elena had asked, though every instinct screamed that she didn't want to know the answer. "Domestic service. Nothing more strenuous than what you're already doing, I imagine. The family will provide room and board, and after 1 year of service, you'll have earned enough to pay off your debts with money left over." Webb had leaned forward slightly. "Both of you, of course. They specifically requested sisters." The offer had sounded too good to be true, which should have been Elena's first warning. But with the foreclosure deadline looming and winter approaching, desperation had a way of drowning out wisdom. "We'd need to think about it," Elena had said carefully. Webb's smile had grown wider, more predatory. "Of course. But don't think. Too long opportunities like this don't wait forever. I'll need an answer by tomorrow evening." After he left, Elena and Rosa had talked long into the night. Rosa had been excited about the possibility of adventure, of seeing California and earning real money. Elena had felt nothing but dread, but what choice did they have? Stay and lose everything anyway, or take the risk and hope Webb was telling the truth about legitimate work? The next morning had brought devastating news that made their decision for them. Elena had discovered that 3 of their goats had died in the night, probably poisoned. Without the income from selling goat milk and cheese, they wouldn't last another week. When Webb returned that evening, Elena had given him their answer. The journey west had started normally enough. Webb had provided a covered wagon and supplies, even a guard he claimed was for their protection. For the first few days, Elena had almost allowed herself to believe they had made the right choice. Then they had reached the remote trading post, where everything changed. Elena would never forget the moment she realized they had been betrayed. They had stopped for the night at what Webb claimed was a way station, but something had felt wrong from the start. The men who greeted them had looked at her and Rosa with the same calculating expression she had seen in livestock buyers. "Get some rest," Webb had told them, directing them to a small windowless room. "Tomorrow we reach your new employers." But there had been no rest. In the dead of night, rough hands had yanked them from their sleep. Elena had fought back like a cornered animal, screaming for help that never came, while Rosa wept in terror. They were shackled like beasts and loaded into a different wagon, one that wasn't heading west to California, but south, toward the lawless borderlands known for human trafficking. For 3 long weeks they'd been dragged from one nightmare stop to another. Elena had watched, horrified, as others were sold off one by one, young women vanishing into unspeakable fates, children torn from their parents. She had tried everything to escape, but Webb's men were experts in handling human cargo. Every failed attempt left her with more bruises and tighter restraints. Now standing on the auction block in Copper Ridge, Elena felt a terrible certainty settle over her. This was the end. Within minutes, she and Rosa would be torn apart forever, sold to the highest bidder men with no conscience and too much money. She shut her eyes, trying to remember the prayers her mother once whispered to her, the old Navajo blessings Isabella had taught her as a child. 125. The bidding was climbing, voices growing more aggressive. 150. Elena forced herself to look up. That's when she saw him. Standing in the shadows at the edge of the courtyard was a man who didn't belong. Tall and lean, with dark hair under a worn hat, he watched the scene with unreadable Eyes. He wasn't bidding, just observing, his hand resting casually on the pistol at his side. Their eyes locked briefly across the frenzy of the auction, and for the first time in weeks, Elena didn't see hunger or cruelty. She saw something that looked like fury. But not the dangerous kind, the kind that burns for justice. As Webb's voice rang out again, "Do I hear 200? Gentlemen, this is prime stock, a rare mixed Spanish beauty and Navajo endurance. Ideal for any work you've got in mind." Elena noticed the stranger's stance shift. He went still, like a predator ready to pounce. 200, barked a gruff voice from the front. Elena's heart sank. She recognized the bidder, a hulking brute with scarred hands and lifeless eyes. He'd been following the auction circuit for days, buying up the youngest, prettiest girls. "Sold," Webb announced triumphantly. "To Mr. Patterson for $200. The world tilted under Elena's feet. This was it. She would be dragged away to a fate worse than death, with no promise of ever seeing Rosa again. Panic gripped her, and Webb's men began to close in. That's when the stranger stepped forward. He walked with easy confidence, like the trading post belonged to him. His boots made no sound as he crossed the dirt, and the crowd didn't even notice him until he spoke. "I'll give you 500. His voice sliced through the noise like a knife. The entire courtyard went silent, all eyes snapping to him. Even Webb looked stunned. "I'm sorry?" Webb asked, clearly thrown. The stranger held up a leather pouch. Coins clinked inside. 500, cash. Patterson erupted in fury. "Wait. Just a damn minute. The deal's done. She's mine." The stranger turned to him, and whatever was in his eyes made Patterson flinch. "No," the man said quietly. "She's not." Webb, recovering quickly, began to smile greedily. "Well now, this is unusual, but if the gentleman— What's your name, sir?" "You didn't catch it," the stranger replied flatly. "Right, well, if you're paying 500 cash, I suppose we can come to a new understanding," Webb said, rubbing his hands together. "Of course, there'll be a small handling fee." The stranger tossed him the pouch. "Keep the change." Elena stared at the man who had just purchased her freedom, or something like it. $500 was a fortune, more than most people made in a year. Why would a stranger pay that much? And why did he seem so calm, so detached, like this was nothing out of the ordinary? Patterson was still shouting about his rights, but his voice became a dull murmur as Elena studied her buyer. He wasn't like the others. His clothes were plain but high quality. His weapons were well kept, but not flashy. He didn't look like someone who needed to buy women to feel powerful. And most of all, he hadn't looked at her with the hunger she'd grown used to. His gaze had held concern, not possession. Webb's men undid her chains and led her off the block. Elena's legs buckled after so long in the sun, and she stumbled on the stairs. The stranger moved like he meant to catch her, but stopped short, maybe remembering how this must look to the crowd. "Where's my sister?" Elena's voice broke through the silence. "Rosa Rodriguez. She came here with me." The stranger's eyes sharpened. "You've got family here. My sister. She's 15. Please, if you're going to buy me, buy her too. Don't let them split us up." She knew she was begging, but pride meant nothing now. The stranger turned to Webb, who was still greedily counting the unexpected profit. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "The sister, where is she?" Webb glanced up from his money. "Oh, that one's not for sale today. She's being held for a special buyer arrives tomorrow. Premium price for premium goods, you understand." Elena felt her heart sink. She had dared to hope for a moment that the stranger might be their salvation, but it seemed her nightmare was only changing shape, not ending. The stranger studied Webb for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded once, as if reaching some internal decision. "I'll take her too," he said. "Name your price." Webb's eyes lit up with pure greed. "Well now, that's a different matter entirely. That girl's already spoken for, and the buyer's paying premium rates. I couldn't possibly let her go for less than, say, $800. $800. Elena closed her eyes in despair. No one would pay that much, not even for both of them together. She had been foolish to hope. But when she opened her eyes, the stranger was already reaching into his coat. He pulled out another pouch, this one noticeably heavier than the first. "Done," he said, tossing it to Webb without even counting the contents. The entire courtyard had gone dead silent again. $1,300 was more money than most of these men had ever seen in one place. Webb stared at the pouches in his hands as if they might disappear at any moment. "Pleasure doing business," the stranger said dryly. "I'll take both women now." Webb nodded frantically, clearly afraid his miraculous customer might change his mind. Of course, of course. Boys, fetch the other girl. And make sure they're properly prepared for travel." Elena felt a spark of hope kindle in her chest for the first time in weeks. She still didn't understand what was happening or what this stranger wanted with them, but at least she and Rosa would be together. Whatever came next, they would face it as a family. 20 minutes later, Rosa was brought out from the holding area where she had been kept. Elena's heart broke when she saw her sister. The girl looked so much smaller and more fragile than she had 3 weeks ago, her dark hair tangled and her dress torn. But her eyes were still bright with the stubborn spirit that had carried them both through their mother's death and everything that followed. "Elena!" Rosa ran to her sister's side, and Elena wrapped her in a fierce hug despite the chains still binding her wrists. "I'm here," Elena whispered. "We're going to be okay." The stranger watched this reunion without comment, but Elena caught something that might have been approval in his expression. He gestured toward a horse and wagon waiting at the edge of the courtyard. "Time to go," he said simply. As they walked toward the wagon, Elena noticed several things about their new owner that gave her cautious hope. First, he had made no move to chain them or otherwise restrain them beyond what was necessary for the public transaction. Second, his wagon was equipped with supplies and bedrolls that suggested he intended to treat them as passengers rather than cargo. Third, and most importantly, he had positioned himself so that his body blocked them from the view of the other men at the trading post, giving them a small measure of dignity in an undignified situation. Webb followed them to the wagon, still clutching his pouches of coins and babbling about what a pleasure it had been to do business. The stranger ignored him completely, helping Rosa into the wagon bed with surprising gentleness before turning to assist Elena. "Can you ride?" he asked quietly, nodding toward a saddled horse tied behind the wagon. Elena blinked in surprise. She had expected to be chained in the wagon bed like cargo. "Yes, I can ride." "Good. It's faster, and we have ground to cover before dark." He untied the horse and handed her the reins, then moved to free her hands from the iron shackles. The moment the metal fell away, Elena felt a rush of relief so intense it made her dizzy. She rubbed her raw wrists, hardly believing they were finally free. The stranger swung up onto his own horse, a sturdy black gelding that looked like it could run all day without tiring. He touched the brim of his hat to Webb in a gesture that was more dismissive than polite. "Much obliged," he said, and there was something in his tone that made it clear the conversation was over. As they rode away from Copper Ridge, Elena found herself riding between the stranger and the wagon where Rosa sat wrapped in a clean blanket he had provided. The sun was beginning to set, painting the desert landscape in shades of gold and crimson that reminded her painfully of home. They rode in silence for the first hour, the only sounds the rhythmic hoofbeats and the creak of wagon wheels on the rocky trail. Elena's mind raced with questions, but she was almost afraid to speak. This reprieve felt too fragile to risk with the wrong words. Finally, as the lights of Copper Ridge disappeared behind them, the stranger spoke. "My name is Samuel Carter," he said without looking at her. "Most people call me Sam." Elena waited for him to say more, but he seemed content to leave it at that. After another few minutes of silence, she found her courage. "I'm Elena Rodriguez. This is my sister Rosa." She paused, then forced herself to ask the question that terrified her most. "What do you want with us?" Sam was quiet for so long that Elena began to think he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his words were not what she had expected. "Right now, I want to get you somewhere safe," he said. "Beyond that, we'll figure it out as we go." It wasn't exactly reassuring, but it wasn't threatening either. Elena decided she would have to be content with that for now. She was alive, Rosa was alive, and they were together. After 3 weeks in hell, that felt like a miracle worth protecting. As they rode deeper into the desert, toward whatever uncertain future awaited them, Elena allowed herself one small prayer of gratitude to her mother's memory. They weren't safe yet, but for the first time since this nightmare began, she dared to believe they might be. The adobe ranch house materialized from the darkness like something conjured from Elena's desperate prayers. After riding for what felt like an eternity through the unforgiving desert landscape, the sight of shelter made her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. Lantern light glowed warmly through curtained windows, and she could make out the silhouettes of corrals and outbuildings scattered around the main structure. Sam had barely spoken during their journey, responding to Elena's tentative questions with grunts or single-word answers that told her nothing about his intentions. Rosa had dozed fitfully in the wagon bed, exhaustion finally claiming her after weeks of terror and uncertainty. Now as they approached what was clearly Sam's home, Elena felt her anxiety spike again. What kind of man lived alone in such isolation? And what did he truly want from them? Sam dismounted first, his movements efficient and practiced in the darkness. He approached the wagon where Rosa was stirring, awakened by the cessation of motion, and offered his hand to help her down. The gesture was polite, almost courtly, which only deepened Elena's confusion about his character. "Welcome to Lost Creek Ranch," Sam said, his voice carrying easily in the still night air. "It's not much, but it's secure." Elena slid down from her horse, her legs unsteady after hours in the saddle. The silence of the desert pressed around them, broken only by the distant call of a coyote and the soft nickering of horses in the nearby corral. She studied the ranch buildings, noting their solid construction and well-maintained appearance. This was no temporary shelter or rough frontier outpost. Someone had built this place to last. Sam led them toward the main house, Rosa clinging close to Elena's side. The front door opened before they reached it, revealing a woman Elena's age, with graying hair pulled back in a practical bun. She wore a simple dress and an expression of gentle concern that immediately put Elena on guard. In her experience, strangers who appeared too kind usually had ulterior motives. "Maria," Sam said by way of introduction. "These are the Rodriguez sisters, Elena and Rosa. They'll be staying with us for a while." Maria nodded as if this was the most natural thing in the world. "Of course. I've prepared the guest room." She stepped aside to let them enter, her dark eyes taking in their disheveled appearance and the barely healed rope burns on Elena's wrists. If she was shocked by what she saw, she hid it well. The interior of the house was a revelation. Elena had expected rough frontier accommodations, but instead found herself in a space that spoke of comfort and care. Hand-woven rugs covered polished wooden floors, and the furniture, while simple, was well-crafted and arranged with an eye for both function and beauty. Books lined shelves along one wall, and fresh wildflowers sat in a pottery vase on a side. "Table. You must be hungry," Maria said, bustling toward what Elena assumed was the kitchen. "I'll have something ready in just a few minutes." Rosa looked up at Elena with wide, uncertain eyes. The poor girl had been through so much that even kindness seemed threatening now. Elena squeezed her sister's hand reassuringly, though she felt far from confident herself. Sam removed his hat and hung it on a peg near the door, running his hands through dark hair streaked with premature silver. In the lamplight, Elena could see him more clearly than she had during their long ride. His face was weathered but not unkind, with intelligent blue eyes that seemed to miss very little. There was something about him that suggested education and refinement, despite his frontier surroundings. "Maria runs the household," Sam explained, settling into a leather chair near the fireplace. "She's been with me for 3 years now. Before that, she worked for a family in Santa Fe." Elena filed this information away, wondering what had brought Maria to this isolated ranch and why Sam felt the need to explain her presence. Was he trying to reassure them, or was there something else behind his words? Maria returned carrying a tray laden with simple but hearty food, thick slices of bread, cheese, cold meat, and fresh fruit that must have come from the ranch's own trees. The sight and smell of real food made Elena's stomach clench with sudden, overwhelming hunger. For weeks, they had survived on scraps and whatever slop their captors had deemed sufficient to keep them alive. "Eat slowly," Maria advised gently, setting the tray on a low table within their reach. "Your stomachs need time to adjust to proper food again." The kindness in her voice almost broke Elena's carefully maintained composure. She had grown so accustomed to cruelty and indifference that simple human decency felt like a physical blow. Rosa needed no encouragement to reach for the bread, tearing off pieces with shaking hands and stuffing them into her mouth as if afraid the food might disappear. "Easy, Mia," Elena murmured, using their mother's endearment. "It's not going anywhere." But even as she cautioned her sister, Elena found herself eating with similar desperation. The bread was soft and still warm from the oven, the cheese sharp and satisfying. She couldn't remember when anything had tasted so good. Sam watched them eat without comment, his expression unreadable. Elena tried to maintain some dignity, but hunger was a more powerful force than pride. When Maria returned with glasses of fresh milk, Elena had to bite back tears. Such simple abundance felt like a miracle after the degradation of the past weeks. "There's a bath drawn for you both," Maria said once they had taken the edge off. "Their hunger. Clean clothes, too. I made some guesses about sizes, but we can adjust anything that doesn't fit." Elena looked down at her own filthy, torn dress and realized she couldn't even remember the last time she had been truly clean. The prospect of hot water and soap seemed almost too wonderful to believe. "Thank you," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Maria led them down a short hallway to a room that contained not only a copper bathtub filled with steaming water, but also fresh towels, soap that smelled of lavender, and clean clothes laid out on a narrow bed. Elena stared at the setup in amazement. When was the last time anyone had gone to such trouble for her comfort? "Take your time," Maria said, closing the door behind her. "No one will disturb you." Elena helped Rosa undress, her heart aching at the sight of her sister's thin frame and the bruises that mottled her pale skin. Rosa had always been delicate, but weeks of poor food and rough treatment had left her looking fragile as spun glass. The hot water was a revelation. Elena sank into it with a sigh that came from her very soul, feeling weeks of grime and fear begin to dissolve. Rosa curled up in the tub like a child, her dark hair floating around her shoulders as she finally began to relax. "Are we safe here?" Rosa asked quietly, the first words she had spoken since leaving Copper Ridge. Elena wished she could give her sister the reassurance she desperately needed. "I don't know," she admitted, "but it's better than where we were. He paid so much." "Money for us," Rosa continued, her voice barely audible above the soft lapping of water. "What does he want?" It was the question that had been haunting Elena since Sam's unexpected intervention at the auction. $1,300 was a fortune more than most people saw in several years. No one paid that kind of money without expecting something substantial in return. "I don't know that either," Elena said, reaching over to smooth Rosa's wet hair. "But whatever happens, we'll face it together." After they had bathed and dressed in the clean clothes Maria had provided, Elena felt almost human again. The simple cotton dress fit well enough, and the undergarments were clean and soft against her skin. Rosa looked years younger in her fresh clothes, though the haunted expression never quite left her eyes. When they emerged from the bathing room, they found Sam still sitting by the fireplace, reading a leather-bound book by lamplight. He glanced up when they appeared, and Elena caught something that might have been approval in his expression. "Better?" he asked simply. Elena nodded, suddenly self-conscious under his gaze. Clean and properly dressed, she felt exposed in a different way than she had at the auction. There, she had been reduced to mere commodity. Here, she was being treated like a person again, and somehow that felt more dangerous. Maria appeared with fresh cups of coffee and gestured for them to sit on the comfortable sofa across from Sam's chair. Elena settled carefully on the edge of the cushions, ready to flee if necessary, while Rosa curled up beside her like a cat seeking warmth and security. "I suppose you have questions," Sam said, closing his book and setting it aside. Elena lifted her chin, summoning what remained of her courage. "Why did you buy us?" The directness of the question seemed to surprise him. He was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire as if seeking answers in the dancing flames. "Because you needed help," he said finally. "And because I had the means to provide it." It was hardly a complete answer, but something in his tone suggested it was the truth, at least as far as it went. Elena pressed on. $1,300 is a great deal of money. People don't usually spend that much on strangers out of simple charity. Sam's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. "You're right to be suspicious. Trust is a luxury you can't afford right now." He leaned forward, his blue eyes serious. "I won't lie to you, I didn't act purely out of altruism. But my reasons aren't what you probably fear." "Then what are they?" Sam was quiet again, and Elena got the impression he was choosing his words carefully. "Let's just say I have experience with people who prey on the vulnerable. I don't like seeing it happen when I have the power to stop it." There was something in his voice, a hardness that hadn't been there before, that made Elena think there was much more to this story. But she sensed that pushing for details now would only make him withdraw further. "What happens now?" she asked. "Instead, now you rest," Sam said. "You recover. You decide what you want to do next." Elena frowned. "What we want to do. You're not prisoners here. When you're ready, you're free to leave. I'll provide transportation to wherever you want to go, and enough money to get you started again." The offer was so unexpected that Elena could only stare at him. After weeks of being treated as property, the idea that someone was actually giving her choices felt surreal. "And if we choose to stay?" The question slipped out before Elena could stop it. Sam's expression grew thoughtful. "Then we'll figure out an arrangement that works for everyone. This ranch needs help, and you both need a place to recover. It could be mutually beneficial." Rosa stirred beside Elena, speaking for the first time since their arrival. "Would we be safe here?" Sam turned his attention to the younger girl, his voice gentle but firm. "As long as you're under my roof, no one will hurt you again. I give you my word." There was something in the way he said it that made Elena believe him. This was a man accustomed to keeping his promises whatever the cost. Maria reappeared to show them to their room, which turned out to be spacious and comfortable, with 2 narrow beds and a window that looked out over the desert. Clean sheets and soft pillows felt like unimaginable luxury after weeks of sleeping on hard ground or dirty straw. As Elena lay in the darkness listening to Rosa's gradually steadying breathing, she tried to make sense of their situation. By all rights, they should be dead or sold into a fate worse than death. Instead, they were clean, fed, and sleeping in comfortable beds under the protection of a man who claimed to want nothing from them but the opportunity to help. It was too good to be true, which meant there had to be a catch somewhere. Elena had learned the hard way that nothing in life came without a price. The question was what Sam Carter's price would ultimately be, and whether she would be willing to pay it when the time came. But as exhaustion finally claimed her, Elena found herself hoping desperately that this sanctuary might be real. She was so tired of running, so tired of fighting just to survive. If Sam was offering them a chance to rest and heal, even temporarily, perhaps she could afford to let her guard down just enough to sleep through the night without nightmares. The morning sun streaming through their window woke Elena earlier than she had slept in weeks. For a moment, she lay still, disoriented by the softness of the mattress and the absence of the fear that had been her constant companion. Then memory returned, and with it, caution. Rosa was still sleeping deeply, her face peaceful for the first time in weeks. Elena eased out of bed carefully, not wanting to wake her sister, and moved to the window to look out at their surroundings in daylight. Lost Creek Ranch spread out before her like something from a dream of the life she had always wanted, but never dared hope for. The main house sat in a natural valley protected by low hills on three sides, with a clear stream running nearby, the creek that gave the ranch its name, she assumed. Corrals held several horses that looked well cared for and valuable, and she could see cattle grazing in pastures that stretched toward the horizon. This was no small homestead scraping by on the edge of survival. This was a substantial operation that represented serious wealth and careful planning. What kind of man was Sam Carter, and how had he come to own all this? A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "Elena?" Maria's voice was gentle but alert. "Are you awake?" "Yes, come in." Maria entered carrying a tray with coffee and fresh biscuits. "I thought you might be hungry. Sam's already out checking the cattle, but he said to tell you that. You're welcome to explore the ranch if you'd like." Elena accepted the coffee gratefully, inhaling the rich aroma. "Maria, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "How long have you known Sam? I mean, really known him?" Maria settled into the room's single chair, her expression thoughtful. 3 years, like he told you. But sometimes I feel like I hardly know him at all." She paused, seeming to weigh her words. "He's a good man, Elena. Whatever happened to bring him out here, whatever he's running from or toward, he's one of the decent ones." "Running from?" Elena picked up on the phrase immediately. "We're all running from something out here," Maria said quietly. "The desert doesn't draw people who are completely satisfied with their lives elsewhere." It wasn't exactly reassuring, but Elena appreciated Maria's honesty. At least she wasn't being fed fairy tales about their mysterious benefactor. Rosa began to stir, and Maria left them to dress and eat in peace. The clothes from the night before still fit well, and Elena found herself wondering where Maria had acquired women's clothing in their sizes on such short notice. Another small mystery in a situation full of them. After breakfast, Elena decided to take Sam up on his offer to explore. Rosa chose to stay close to the house, still too fragile to venture far from what felt like safety. Elena understood her sister needed time to recover from trauma that had shaken her to her core. The ranch was even more impressive up close than it had appeared from the window. Everything was well maintained and organized with military precision. The horses in the corrals were quality animals, the kind that cost serious money. The cattle, she could see, were healthy and numerous. This was no struggling frontier operation, but a thriving business. Elena was examining the vegetable garden behind the house when she heard hoofbeats approaching. She looked up to see Sam riding toward the house on his black gelding, his hat pulled low against the morning sun. There was something about the way he sat his horse that spoke of years in the saddle, and Elena found herself wondering about his background once again. He dismounted near the corral and began unsaddling his horse with practiced efficiency. Elena watched from a distance, noting the careful way he handled the animal and the obvious affection between man and horse. Whatever else Sam Carter might be, he was no casual horseman. "Finding everything to your liking?" he asked when he noticed her watching. Elena approached slowly, still maintaining a careful distance. "It's beautiful. You've built something impressive here." Sam's hands stilled on the saddle for a moment. "I didn't build it," he said quietly. "I inherited it." Another piece of the puzzle, but one that raised more questions than it answered. Elena waited to see if he would elaborate, but Sam seemed disinclined to share details. "How are you feeling?" he asked instead, turning to face her fully. "Better than yesterday, I hope." Elena nodded, suddenly aware of how she must look standing there in Maria's borrowed dress, her hair still shorter than it should be from weeks of poor care. "Much better, thank you. But I have to ask, what do you expect from us?" "There has to be something." Sam finished with his horse and turned to lean against the corral fence. "I expect you to heal," he said simply. "To rest, to eat, to remember what it feels like to be safe. Beyond that, we'll see. And when we've healed, when we're ready to make decisions about our future, then you'll make them," Sam said. "I meant what I said last night. You're not prisoners here. When you're ready to leave, I'll help you go wherever you want to go." Elena studied his face, looking for signs of deception or hidden agenda. All she saw was a man who appeared to mean exactly what he said, which somehow made her more nervous than if he had been obviously villainous. "Why should we trust you?" she asked bluntly. Sam considered the question seriously. "You shouldn't," he said finally. "Not yet. Trust is something that has to be earned, and I haven't had time to earn yours. All I can do is give you my word, and then prove it's worth something." The honesty of the answer caught Elena off guard. She had expected reassurances or attempts at charm, not this straightforward acknowledgement of the situation. "I don't understand you," she admitted. For the first time since she had met him, Sam smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes and transformed his entire face. "Good," he said. "That means you're being appropriately cautious. The day you think you have me completely figured out is the day you should probably start worrying." Despite everything, Elena found herself almost smiling in return. There was something about Sam Carter that she couldn't quite define, a combination of strength and gentleness, mystery and openness that kept her off balance in the most unexpected way. As they walked back toward the house together, Elena allowed herself to consider the possibility that their nightmare might truly be over. It was a dangerous hope, one that could lead to devastating disappointment if she was wrong. But standing in the warm morning sunshine with the promise of safety surrounding her, Elena found it increasingly difficult to maintain her guard against the idea that sometimes, just sometimes, strangers really did help each other without expecting anything in return. The question was whether she dared to believe it. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm that Elena had never thought possible. Each morning brought the same gentle routine coffee with Maria in the kitchen while Rosa slept late, recovering from trauma that ran deeper than physical exhaustion. Then Elena would venture outside to help with whatever tasks the ranch required, grateful for work that felt meaningful rather than desperate. Sam had been true to his word about not treating them as prisoners. He made no demands on their time, issued no orders, and respected the boundaries Elena maintained around herself and Rosa. But as days turned into weeks, Elena found those boundaries becoming harder to maintain. It was difficult to remain suspicious of a man who consistently treated them with quiet respect and genuine consideration. The desert had transformed around them as autumn deepened. The oppressive heat of late summer gave way to crisp mornings and pleasantly warm afternoons. Elena discovered that the ranch came alive in ways she hadn't expected. Birds returned to nest in the cottonwoods along the creek, and wildflowers bloomed in unexpected places, adding splashes of color to the endless brown landscape. Rosa had begun to emerge from her shell, slowly but noticeably. She helped Maria with cooking and mending, tasks that reminded Elena painfully of their mother and the life they had lost. But she still jumped at unexpected sounds and rarely ventured far from the house without Elena nearby. The trauma of their captivity had left scars that would take much longer to heal than their physical injuries. Elena threw herself into ranch work with an intensity that surprised even her. She had always been strong and capable, but here she discovered skills she hadn't known she possessed. Sam taught her to repair fencing, to read the signs that indicated a horse was favoring one leg, to judge the quality of hay and grain. Was a patient teacher, never condescending, always willing to explain the reasoning behind ranch decisions. "You have good instincts," he told her one afternoon as they worked together to break a young colt to halter. "Better than most people who've been around horses their whole lives." Elena felt an unexpected flush of pride at the compliment. It had been so long since anyone had recognized her abilities or valued her contributions that she had almost forgotten what competence felt like. The colt they were working with was a beautiful bay with intelligent eyes and a stubborn streak that reminded Elena of herself. Sam had named him Courage, which seemed fitting for an animal that approached every new experience with cautious determination. "He doesn't trust easily," Sam observed as the colt shied away from the halter for the third time. "But once he decides you're worthy of his confidence, he'll be loyal forever." Elena wondered if Sam was talking about the horse or making some deeper observation about character in general. She had noticed that he often spoke in ways that seemed to carry multiple meanings, as if he was accustomed to keeping his thoughts carefully guarded. "How long have you been training horses?" she asked, trying to coax Courage into accepting the halter with patient movements and gentle words. "Since I was younger than Rosa," Sam replied. "My father believed that understanding horses was essential to understanding life in general. He used to say that horses were honest in ways that people rarely managed to be." It was one of the few personal details Sam had shared about his past, and Elena filed it away with the other small pieces of information she had gathered. He spoke occasionally about his father, always with respect and a hint of something that might have been grief. His mother, he had never mentioned at all. The colt finally allowed Elena to slip the halter over his head, standing perfectly still as she fastened the buckles. The moment felt like a small victory, and Elena couldn't help but smile at the achievement. "Well done," Sam said, and there was genuine warmth in his voice. "You'll make a fine horsewoman with a little more practice." Elena felt that flush of pride again, stronger this time. When was the last time someone had praised her efforts or suggested she might have a future that included mastering new skills? For so long, her life had been focused solely on survival, hers and Rosa's. The idea that she might actually develop expertise in something she enjoyed was almost foreign. As they led Courage back to his paddock, Elena found herself studying Sam's profile. In the weeks since their arrival, she had grown accustomed to his presence, but she still knew frustratingly little about him. He was unfailingly polite but rarely personal, helpful but never intrusive. It was as if he had perfected the art of being present without revealing himself. "Sam," she said impulsively, then hesitated as he turned to look at her. "Can I ask you something?" "You can ask," he replied with that slight smile that never quite revealed what he was thinking. "I reserve the right not to answer." Elena took a breath, gathering her courage. "Why are you really doing this? And please don't tell me it's simple charity, because $1,300 isn't simple anything." Sam was quiet for so long that Elena began to think he would exercise his right not to answer. They had reached the paddock and released Courage to run free in the enclosed space. The young horse immediately began racing around the perimeter, celebrating his freedom with joyful abandon. "You want the truth?" Sam asked finally. "I think I've earned it." Sam nodded slowly, as if coming to some internal decision. "The truth is complicated, and it's not a particularly pleasant story." Elena waited, sensing that pushing would only make him retreat again. Sam leaned against the paddock fence, his gaze following Courage's exuberant circuits. "I had a wife. Once," he said quietly. "Catherine. We met in Denver when I was there on business. She was the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen, but that wasn't what drew me to her. She was intelligent, passionate about justice, always fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves." Elena felt something cold settle in her stomach. The past tense he was using suggested this story didn't have a happy ending. "We were married for 3 years," Sam continued. "Good years mostly. We planned to start a family, to build something lasting together. But Kate couldn't ignore suffering when she saw it, even when getting involved put her in danger." He paused, and Elena could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands gripped the fence rail with barely controlled emotion. "There was a group in Denver trafficking young women, mostly immigrants who didn't speak English well enough to seek help. Kate discovered what was happening and started documenting evidence, trying to build a case that would shut them down permanently." Sam's voice had grown harder, edged with old anger. "I begged her to let the authorities handle it, but she said the authorities were either bought off or didn't care enough to act." Elena's blood ran cold as she began to understand where this story was leading. "They figured out what she was doing," Sam said. "Found her one night when she was gathering testimony from one of their victims. They made it look like an accident, a carriage mishap in an area known for poor road conditions. But I knew better." The pain in his voice was raw, immediate, as if Kate's death had happened yesterday instead of however many years ago it had actually occurred. "I'm sorry," Elena said softly, meaning it completely. She understood the particular agony of losing someone you loved, though her loss had been to disease rather than violence. Sam nodded acknowledgement of her sympathy, but continued his story. "After Kate died, I spent 2 years hunting the men responsible. I found them eventually, all of them." He turned to look at Elena directly, and she saw something in his eyes that made her take an involuntary step backward. "Justice isn't always delivered by courts and juries." Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the desert evening. She was beginning to understand that Sam Carter was a far more dangerous man than his quiet demeanor suggested. "I came out here afterward," Sam said, his voice returning to its normal tone. "Bought this ranch from a widow who couldn't manage it alone anymore. I thought I was done with all of that, the violence, the crusading, the fight against people who prey on the innocent." He smiled, but there was no humor in it. "Then I heard about an auction in Copper Ridge where human beings were being sold like livestock, and I discovered I wasn't as retired from that life as I thought." Elena stared at him, pieces of the puzzle finally falling into place. "You came to Copper Ridge specifically because you knew about the trafficking." "I'd been tracking Webb's operation for months," Sam confirmed. "I knew he was moving merchandise through that area, and I knew when the auction was scheduled. I just didn't know." He trailed off, then started again. "I didn't expect to see someone who reminded me so much of Kate." Elena felt her breath catch. "I remind you of your wife?" Sam studied her face carefully, as if seeing her for the first time. "Not in appearance, but in spirit, yes. The way you stood on that platform, defiant even in chains. The way you demanded to know about your sister instead of begging for your own life. Kate would have done exactly the same thing." The comparison should have felt like a compliment, but Elena found it unsettling instead. Was Sam's kindness toward them motivated by genuine concern, or was he trying to assuage guilt over his failure to save his wife by rescuing someone else? "So we're not here because you wanted to help strangers," she said carefully. "We're here because I reminded you of someone you couldn't save." Sam considered this, his expression thoughtful. "Maybe that's how it started," he admitted. "But it's not why you're still here. You and Rosa aren't substitutes for Kate, Elena. You're yourselves 2 people who deserved better than what was happening to you. If I was motivated by guilt initially, I'd like to think I'm motivated by something healthier now." Elena wanted to ask what that something was, But the conversation was interrupted by the sound of hoofbeats approaching the ranch. Sam straightened immediately, his hand moving instinctively toward the gun at his hip. The casual gesture reminded Elena that despite the peaceful atmosphere of the ranch, they were still living in a dangerous world. "Expecting someone?" Elena asked, noting how quickly Sam's entire demeanor had shifted from reflective to alert. "No," Sam said grimly. "And unexpected visitors out here are rarely good news." 3 riders emerged from the gathering dusk, their horses lathered with sweat as if they had been riding hard. Elena felt her heart begin to race as she recognized the type of men they were: rough, armed with the predatory alertness of people accustomed to violence. They looked exactly like the kind of men who had worked for Webb. "Stay behind me," Sam said quietly, moving to position himself between Elena and the approaching riders. "And be ready to run back to the house if I tell you to." The lead rider was a large man with a scar running from his left ear to the corner of his mouth. He brought his horse to a stop just outside the paddock and touched his hat in a gesture that was more mockery than politeness. "Evening," he said, his voice carrying a hint of accent that Elena couldn't place. "Fine ranch you got here. Must be profitable, judging by the quality of your livestock." "It does well enough," Sam replied evenly. "What can I do for you gentlemen?" The scarred man smiled, revealing teeth stained with tobacco. "We're looking for some missing property. 2 women, Spanish-Indian mix, went missing from a business transaction in Copper Ridge a few weeks back. You wouldn't happen to have seen anything like that, would you?" Elena's blood turned to ice. Somehow, Webb had tracked them here. Despite Sam's assurances about safety, their nightmare wasn't over after all. Sam's stance shifted almost imperceptibly, but Elena caught the change. He was preparing for violence, she realized. Whatever happened next, it wasn't going to end with polite conversation. "Can't say that I have," Sam said, his voice remaining perfectly calm. "But then, I don't get many visitors out here. Tend to mind my own business and expect others to do the same." "Funny thing about business," the scarred man said, his smile growing wider. "Sometimes it has a way of following you places you don't expect. These particular pieces of property are quite valuable, worth considerable effort to recover." Elena realized with growing horror that these men weren't just looking for them. They were planning to take them back by force, and they clearly didn't expect Sam to be able to stop them. "I'm afraid you'll have to look elsewhere," Sam said. "And I'd appreciate it if you'd move along before dark. This is private property, and I value my privacy." The scarred man laughed, a sound completely devoid of humor. "Privacy's an expensive luxury out here. Sometimes a man has to be willing to pay for it in ways he might not prefer." The threat was unmistakable, and Elena saw Sam's hand move fractionally closer to his weapon. The tension in the air was so thick she could barely breathe. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Sam said, his voice taking on a different quality, something harder and infinitely more dangerous. "You see, I'm not just any rancher. Some folks in the territory know me by another name. Samuel Carter used to be Sam Morrison, and Sam Morrison has a particular reputation when it comes to dealing with men who traffic in human misery." Elena saw the scarred man's confident expression falter slightly. Apparently, the name Morrison meant something to him. "Now," Sam continued, his hand now resting openly on his gun butt, "I'm going to give you boys one chance to ride away from here and forget you ever saw this place. Because if you choose to make this into something more complicated, I guarantee you won't like how it ends." The scarred man's eyes narrowed as he weighed his options. Elena could see him calculating odds, wondering if Sam was bluffing or if the reputation he claimed was real. 3 against 1, the man said finally. "I like those odds, do you?" Sam asked mildly. "Then you haven't been paying attention." Elena heard the soft whisper of metal against leather, and suddenly Sam's pistol was in his hand, though she hadn't seen him draw it. The movement had been so fast it seemed like magic, and the scarred man's confident expression disappeared entirely. "Like I said," Sam continued conversationally, "you boys might want to reconsider your approach to this problem." The standoff stretched for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only seconds. Elena held her breath, waiting for the violence that seemed inevitable. Then the scarred man slowly raised his hands, his eyes never leaving Sam's gun. "Easy. Now," he said, "no need for things to get unpleasant. We were just asking questions." "And I gave you an answer," Sam replied. "Now it's time for you to leave." The three men turned their horses and rode away, but Elena could see from their body language that this wasn't over. They would be back, probably with reinforcements, and next time they wouldn't bother with polite conversation. Sam holstered his weapon and turned to Elena, his face grim. "We need to get you and Rosa inside, now." As they hurried toward the house, Elena's mind raced with the implications of what had just happened. Their sanctuary had been compromised, and the safety she had begun to take for granted was revealed to be far more fragile than she had realized. But more than that, she had seen a side of Sam that she hadn't suspected existed. The quiet rancher was also a gunfighter with a reputation dangerous enough to give hardened criminals pause. The question was whether this made him more trustworthy or less. As they reached the safety of the house, Elena realized that her feelings about Sam Carter had just become infinitely more complicated. The house felt different that night, charged with tension that made every shadow seem threatening and every sound potentially dangerous. Elena sat by the window in their bedroom, watching the darkness beyond the glass while Rosa slept fitfully. Beside her, Maria had quietly checked and double-checked all the locks before retiring to her own room, her usual calm demeanor replaced by obvious anxiety. Sam hadn't come inside at all. Elena could see him moving between the outbuildings, checking perimeters and positioning himself where he could watch the approaches to the ranch. The easy confidence he usually carried had been replaced by the focused alertness of a man preparing for war. Elena's mind churned with everything that had happened, everything Sam had revealed about himself and his past. The quiet rancher who had rescued them was also a man with blood on his hands, someone who had hunted killers through the Colorado mountains and dispensed his own brand of justice. Should she feel safer knowing he was capable of such violence, or more frightened about what it meant for their future? A soft knock on the door interrupted her brooding. "Elena?" Sam's voice was barely above a whisper. "Are you awake?" She opened the door to find him standing in the hallway, his rifle cradled in his arms and his expression grim. In the lamplight, she could see the exhaustion etched in the lines around his eyes. "We need to talk," he said quietly. "About what happens next." Elena glanced back at Rosa, who was still sleeping despite her restless movements. "Let me get my shawl." They made their way to the kitchen, where Maria had left coffee warming on the stove. Sam poured 2 cups and settled across from Elena at the wooden table, setting his rifle within easy reach. The normalcy of sharing coffee felt surreal given the circumstances. "They'll be back," Sam said without preamble. "Probably tomorrow night, and they won't come alone next time." Elena wrapped her hands around her cup, seeking warmth against the chill that had nothing to do with the desert evening. "How many men do you think Webb can gather?" "Enough to be a serious problem. Men like Webb have connections throughout the territory, other traffickers, hired guns, corrupt officials who look the other way for the right price." Sam's expression was troubled. "I can handle a few men, but if he brings a small army—" He didn't need to finish the thought. Elena understood the implications perfectly. "So what are our options?" she asked, proud that her voice remained steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. Sam was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee as if it held answers to impossible questions. "I can try to get you and Rosa away from here before they return. There are places in Mexico where you could disappear, start over with new names." I have contacts who could help arrange papers, transportation. And you, would you come with us? No. The answer was immediate and final. They know about this place now, know that I was involved in taking Webb's property. If I run, they'll never stop hunting me. Better to make a stand here, on ground I know. Elena felt her stomach drop. You're talking about staying here to die. I'm talking about staying here to fight, Sam corrected. There's a difference. I've been in worse situations and lived to tell about it. But Elena could see the doubt in his eyes, the knowledge that this time the odds might be too great, even for Sam Morrison's legendary skills. He was offering to sacrifice himself to give her and Rosa a chance at freedom, and the realization hit her like a physical blow. There has to be another way, she said desperately. Some other option that doesn't end with you dead and us running for the rest of our lives. Sam's smile was sad and gentle. Sometimes there aren't good choices. Elena, sometimes you just have to pick the least terrible option and hope for the best. Elena stared at him, this man who had appeared in their darkest hour like an answer to prayer, only to reveal himself as someone whose own demons were just as dark as the ones pursuing them. The unfairness of it all threatened to overwhelm her. Why? She asked, her voice breaking slightly. Why are you willing to die for people you barely know? Sam set down his coffee cup and leaned back in his chair, studying her face with an intensity that made her feel exposed and vulnerable. You really want to know? Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. Because I've spent the last 5 years trying to atone for failing to save Kate. Because I've been walking around half dead since she died, going through the motions of living without actually feeling alive. His voice was quiet but steady, each word carefully chosen. These past weeks, watching you and Rosa heal, seeing you discover your own strength, it's reminded me what it feels like to have something worth protecting again. The honesty in his words left Elena breathless. She had sensed the depth of his grief, but hearing him articulate it so clearly made her understand the true weight of what he was offering. You're not responsible for saving us, she said softly. You've already done more than anyone had a right to expect. I know that, Sam replied. But responsibility isn't the same thing as choice. I choose to fight for you and Rosa because it's the right thing to do, and because... He hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. Because I care about what happens to you. The simple statement hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that Elena wasn't sure she was ready to examine. Over the weeks at the ranch, she had grown to respect Sam, to feel grateful for his protection, even to enjoy his company. But somewhere along the way, those feelings had deepened into something more complex and frightening. Sam, she began, then stopped, not knowing how to voice the confusion of emotions swirling through her. I know, he said gently. This isn't the time or place for such conversations. But if we're facing the possibility that tomorrow might be our last chance to speak honestly with each other, then I want you to know that these weeks with you here have been the happiest I've had since Kate died. Elena felt tears prick at her eyes. The tenderness in his voice, the vulnerability he was showing her, made her chest ache with feelings she had buried so deep she had almost forgotten they existed. After her mother's death and the betrayals that followed, she had convinced herself that caring too much was a luxury she couldn't afford. But Sam was making it impossible to maintain that protective distance. You can't die for us, she whispered. I won't let you. Sam reached across the table and covered her hand with his, the contact sending warmth shooting up her arm. It's not your choice to make. Then I'll make a different choice, Elena said, her voice growing stronger as resolve crystallized. Within her, Rosa and I won't run. We'll stay and fight with you. Absolutely not. Sam's response was immediate and emphatic. Elena, these men are killers. They won't hesitate to. To what? Kill us? They were going to do that anyway, just more slowly and cruelly. Elena pulled her hand free from his and leaned forward, meeting his gaze directly. You said yourself. That running means spending the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders. At least if we make our stand here, we're fighting for something we believe in. You don't understand what you're saying. This isn't some romantic adventure, it's life and death, and the odds are terrible. Elena felt a flash of anger at his patronizing tone. Don't you dare treat me like a child who doesn't understand the stakes. I've been living with life and death decisions since I was 10 years old. I know exactly what I'm risking. Sam stared at Elena, clearly torn between the instinct to shield her and the understanding that she had the right to choose her own path. It was a conflict she'd seen in him before, but never with stakes this high. Why? He asked at last. Why would you stay and fight when you could get away? Elena inhaled deeply, steeling herself to speak the truth she'd been avoiding, even from herself. Because this place, this town, it feels more like home than anywhere else ever has. Because you and Maria, you're like family now, and I don't walk away from family. She hesitated, then took a leap and voiced the hardest truth of all, and because I care about what happens to you. A heavy silence followed. Sam looked at her as if seeing someone completely unfamiliar, like she had peeled away a mask. Her cheeks burned, but she didn't break eye contact. The words were out now, irreversible. Elena, Sam said softly, I don't think you realize what you're feeling. You've been through hell. The safety I gave you, it can seem like something more when you're scared and vulnerable. The words stung, but she recognized them for what they were, his way of protecting both of them from emotions he thought were too risky. Don't tell me what I'm feeling, she replied, voice steady. I'm not confused. I know the difference. Between gratitude and affection, between needing someone and loving them. That last word slipped out before she could stop it, and it lingered in the air between them like a challenge. Sam's breath caught. Elena. I know it's messy, she continued, unable to stop now. The timing's awful, the situation's worse, but ignoring how we feel won't help. Pretending won't change anything, not tomorrow, not what we're up against. Sam was quiet so long she started to worry she'd ruined everything. Maybe she had mistaken his kindness for something more. Maybe to him, she was just another person to protect, another failure he didn't want on his conscience. But when he finally spoke, his voice was raw. I told myself I was keeping my distance to protect you. That letting myself care would just put you in more danger, make me less focused. He held her gaze now, and in it she saw everything she felt mirrored back. But the truth is, I was protecting myself. Losing Kate nearly broke me. The idea of feeling that deeply again, it scares me more than any gunfight. Elena's heart skipped, and now I see it's already happened. Whether I wanted it to or not, I care. He gave her a half smile, half pained, half tender. You were right. Hiding it doesn't help. And if we might not survive what's coming, I want you to know this isn't one-sided. Relief flooded Elena so completely it left her dizzy. For weeks, she had battled her growing feelings, convincing herself it was hopeless and reckless. But now, hearing him admit he felt the same, her defenses crumbled. So what do we do? She asked, her voice soft. We survive the next few days, Sam said. Practical as always. Then, if we're lucky, we figure out the rest. Elena nodded. That was all the commitment they could afford, but it was enough. Just knowing they'd face it together made everything feel less impossible. About Rosa, she said, shifting back to reality. She needs to know the truth. She has a right to choose whether to leave or stay. Sam looked like he wanted to argue, but Elena's determined expression cut him off. You're right, he admitted. She's not a child anymore. Not after all she's endured, but if she chooses to run, then I'm going with her, Elena said without hesitation. I told you I don't abandon family, but I don't think she'll leave. People underestimate her strength. It's just been buried under fear. As if summoned by their words, footsteps echoed down the hallway. Rosa appeared in the doorway, her hair messy from sleep, her eyes wide with the dread she carried daily. "I heard voices," she said quietly. "What's going on?" Elena and Sam exchanged a glance. The time for hard truths had come. "Sit down, Mia," Elena said gently, using the affectionate word their mother once used. "We need to talk." Rosa took a seat beside her, her expression already bracing for bad news. "Those men today," Elena began, carefully choosing her words, "they're hunting us. They work for Webb. They know where we are." Rosa's face went pale, but she didn't flinch. "They're coming back, aren't they?" "Yes," Sam answered bluntly. "Likely tomorrow night. And they won't come alone." Elena watched as her sister absorbed the information, saw the expected fear, but also something else. A spark of resolve, strong and familiar. "What choices do we have?" Rosa asked, sounding far older than her years. Elena explained. They could run to Mexico or stay and fight. Rosa sat silently for a moment, staring at her hands. "If we run, we'll always be looking over our shoulders, won't we?" "That's right," Sam said. "And if we stay, we may not make it." "I understand." Rosa raised her head and met Elena's eyes with fierce determination that echoed their mother's spirit. "Then we stay. I'm tired of running. Tired of being scared. If I'm going to die, I'd rather do it fighting for something that matters." Elena felt pride swell in her chest, fierce and overwhelming. This was the Rosa she knew before their world was torn apart, brave, unyielding, and ready to face whatever came next. "Rosa," Sam said gently, "you need to understand what that means. These men aren't going to fight fair or show mercy. If you stay, you're choosing to risk everything." "I understand," Rosa replied with a calm that was both heartbreaking and inspiring. "But Sam, you need to understand something too. Elena and I have already lost everything that mattered to us once. This ranch, you and Maria, you're all the family we have left. I won't run away from family again." The simple statement hung in the air, carrying a weight of loyalty and love that made Elena's throat tighten with emotion. In that moment, she was prouder of her sister than she had ever been of anything in her life. Sam nodded slowly, and Elena could see him accepting the reality that they were all committed to this path now, whatever the consequences. "All right then," he said quietly. "If we're going to do this, we need to do it right. Tomorrow we prepare, and tomorrow night we make our stand." As they sat around the kitchen table in the lamplight, planning for a battle that might claim all their lives, Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the certainty that she was exactly where she belonged, with people who truly understood the meaning of family and loyalty. Whatever came next, they would face it together. And sometimes Elena realized that was all the victory you could ask for. The desert roses bloomed that morning, their delicate pink petals unfurling despite the harsh conditions that should have killed them. Elena discovered them while making her final preparations, and she took their resilience as a sign that beauty could flourish even in the most unforgiving circumstances. Sam had positioned everyone strategically throughout the ranch buildings. Maria crouched behind the kitchen window with a shotgun, her usual gentle demeanor replaced by the steely determination of someone defending her home. Rosa had proven surprisingly adept with a rifle during their hasty training session, and she now waited in the loft of the main barn with clear sight lines across the yard. Elena found herself beside Sam behind the sturdy stone wall of the well, their rifles loaded and ready. The waiting was the hardest part, knowing that somewhere in the darkness, Webb's men were approaching with violence in their hearts and profit as their motive. "Whatever happens," Sam said quietly, his eyes never leaving the horizon, "know that these months with you have given me something I thought I'd lost forever." Elena reached over and squeezed his hand briefly. "We're going to survive this, all of us." The attack came just after midnight, exactly as Sam had predicted. Elena counted at least 8 riders approaching the ranch, their horses' hooves muffled but not silent on the rocky ground. Webb himself led the group, his bulky form unmistakable even in the moonlight. "Samuel Morrison," Webb called out when they were still 50 yards from the buildings. "We know you're in there with our property. Send out the women and we'll make this easy on everyone." Sam's response was a rifle shot that dropped the man riding beside Webb. The message was unmistakable. There would be no negotiation. What followed was chaos and gunfire, muzzle flashes lighting up the darkness like deadly fireflies. Elena discovered that all her mother's hunting lessons had prepared her better than she'd realized. Her shots were measured and accurate, each one carefully aimed to protect rather than simply destroy. Rosa's rifle cracked from the barn loft with surprising frequency, and Elena felt a fierce pride watching her sister defend their chosen home with such courage. Maria's shotgun boomed from the kitchen window, keeping the attackers from approaching the main house. The battle turned when Sam flanked around behind Webb's position, using his intimate knowledge of the ranch layout to appear where the traffickers least expected him. Elena watched him move like a ghost through the shadows, striking with lethal precision before melting away again. By dawn, it was over. Webb lay dead in the dirt, his dreams of recovering his property ended forever. The survivors of his gang had fled into the desert, unwilling to continue fighting against opponents who refused to be intimidated. Elena found Sam sitting on the porch steps as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. His shirt was torn and blood-stained, but his injuries were minor. More importantly, the haunted look that had shadowed his eyes for so long was finally gone. "It's finished," he said simply as she settled beside him. "Yes," Elena agreed, understanding that he meant more than just the night's violence. The cycle of guilt and vengeance that had driven him since Kate's death was finally broken. Rosa emerged from the barn, her face streaked with powder burns, but her eyes bright with the confidence of someone who had discovered her own strength. Maria appeared from the house, already planning to prepare a celebration breakfast for their victory. They buried the dead in unmarked graves far from the house, wanting no reminders of the violence that had threatened their peace. Elena planted desert roses over the disturbed earth, believing that even from such dark soil, something beautiful might grow. The weeks that followed brought a sense of healing that went deeper than their physical wounds. Elena threw herself into ranch work with renewed purpose, no longer a guest seeking shelter, but a partner building something lasting. Rosa continued her education under Maria's patient tutelage, while also developing into a skilled horsewoman. Under Sam's guidance, Sam himself seemed transformed, the weight of old grief finally lifting to reveal the man he had been before tragedy changed him. He laughed more easily now, spoke of plans for the future, and looked at Elena with eyes full of hope rather than pain. The proposal came on an evening in early spring, when the desert was painted with wildflowers and the air carried the promise of new beginnings. Sam found Elena in the garden, tending to the vegetables they would need for the coming year. "Elena," he said, his voice carrying a nervousness she had never heard before, "I have something to ask you." She straightened, wiping dirt from her hands on her apron. "What is it?" Sam reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold band that caught the last rays of sunlight. "I know our beginning was unconventional, and I know we've both carried more pain than anyone should have to bear. But what we've built here, what we've become together, it feels like the life I was always meant to live." Elena felt her heart skip as he dropped to one knee in the soft earth of their garden. "Will you marry me, Elena Rodriguez? Will you help me turn this ranch into the home it was always meant to be?" Through tears of joy, Elena gave him the only answer her heart would allow: yes. They were married a month later under the cottonwoods by the creek, with Rosa as maid of honor and Maria as witness. The ceremony was simple but perfect, conducted by a traveling preacher who asked no uncomfortable questions about their past. Rosa had initially worried about her place in this new family arrangement, But Sam quickly made it clear that he was gaining not just a wife but a sister as well. He formally adopted Rosa, giving her his name and all the protection it carried. In the territory. Years later, when their own children played in the same garden where Sam had proposed, Elena would look back on that terrifying night at the auction in Copper Ridge and marvel at how completely their lives had changed. What had begun as the darkest moment of her existence had led her to a love deeper than she had ever imagined possible. Sam kept his promise about the ranch becoming a true home. They expanded the operation, hired honest workers, and became known throughout the territory for their fair dealing and open hospitality. Lost Creek Ranch became a beacon of hope for other displaced souls seeking a second chance at life. Rosa grew into a confident young woman who eventually married the son of a neighboring rancher, a good man who valued her strength and intelligence. She and Elena remained as close as ever, their bond forged in shared trauma and strengthened by shared joy. Maria stayed with them until her peaceful death many years later, becoming grandmother to Elena's children and the keeper of family stories that would be passed down through generations. On quiet evenings, when the desert wind whispered through the cottonwoods and the last light faded from the western sky, Elena would sit beside Sam on their porch and watch their children chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. In those moments, she understood that the greatest victory wasn't surviving the violence that had threatened them, but choosing to build something beautiful from the ashes of their former lives. The desert roses still bloomed each spring, a reminder that with enough determination and care, anything could flourish in even the most unlikely places. Elena had learned to be like those roses, resilient, beautiful, and unafraid to bloom wherever life planted her. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.